City Coast students can head out. 5th to 8th graders are welcome to join us out in the student area today during this sermon time. It'll be kind of the last of the Bible studies that our students have for a few weeks, as they're going to be our summer staff over for VBS with City Coast kids. And so students can enjoy that Bible study today. And then, like I said, over the couple of weeks of July and into August, our students are actually going to be our camp counselors for VBS Sundays over in City Coast Kids. So looking forward to that. I hope they're looking forward to that as well. But we're going to continue on with our Summer Wisdom series today in James chapter 4. And we're going to talk about wise planning today. And there are really two sermon segments today. So there's this kind of piece from James that we're going to talk about. And then at the end of today's service, I'm going to actually talk about our plans and our hopes and our dreams and our vision as a church and where we're kind of heading in the next few weeks and months, and hopefully for the next few hundred years. So we'll talk about that at the end today. So if you're new or you're checking things out, it's a great day to kind of peek behind the scenes and see what we're all about. That'll kind of be the second segment of the church. Maybe more like a church meeting today. That'll come later on. But when we think about wise planning, there are a lot of different temperaments when it comes to plans. Maybe you've noticed one of the most frequent conversations that happen around church and around other social circles is like, hey, what are you doing this week? What's going on this week? What do you have planned? What's on the horizon? What are you doing this summer? What are you doing this afternoon even? You know, what's going on today? And we talk about our plans as though they're certain. We talk about our plans as though they're going to happen. We make plans in order to feel good about our lives and our futures and to feel a little bit less anxious about what's going on. And some people, I just thought it'd be helpful to start, like, this is kind of a temperament thing. So could you just kind of give me like a hand or a nod? Are you a planner? Like, are you one of the people who like to have plans? Okay, because there are some temperament things. Like, some people are like, I am not a planner, okay? I just am not, that's not who I am. It's almost sometimes funny to see it, especially in a household with, spouses or partners. You see, like, one of them tends to be the planner, the other one maybe not so much. Maybe for all of us, if, maybe it's another little poll we could take. Like, are you the type of person who likes to have plans, like, on paper, written down? Or are you like a digital planner? So if you're like a writer, you put it down on paper, you keep like a paper planner, or you have like a board in the house or something like that. We got paper planners out there? How many of you are digital? You're like entirely digital in your planning. Everything is kind of, yes. And that can be another way in which we talk about the types of planners we have. There's also some tones to planning, like some people, when they talk about their plans and their futures, it can be very anxiety ridden. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And how's this going to come together? And who's going to be? And you can kind of hear that a little bit. I think Jesus addresses some of that in Matthew chapter 6 in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, hey, don't be anxious about tomorrow. Tomorrow has enough trouble for itself. Just kind of live in the present, live in the day. But there's this other kind of tone that comes to some of our plans. Instead of anxiety, it's almost like an arrogance. Like we say, yeah, this is what I'm doing this afternoon. And this is what I'm doing on Monday. And this is what's going to happen this week. And this is how my summer's going to go. And this is how the next year's going to go. And this is how 10 years from now we're going to go. And this is how I'm going to, it's just like we kind of have almost a tone of arrogance to our plans. And that's really what James chapter 4 is going to talk about, and what we're going to learn today is that wise planners seek and surrender to the will of God. Wise planners, if we're going to be wise planners, we're going to seek and surrender to the will of God. In James chapter 4, if you're there with me, we like to bring our Bibles with us so we can look at it. It'll help you kind of process this. If you keep reading through James like we've encouraged you to do throughout the course of this summer, you may have already been through it a few times. Maybe this has been one of those little nuggets that you've already grabbed onto. But in James chapter 4, verse 13, it addresses some of this arrogance that we can have with our planning. James says, "Come now, you who say," and this is a quote, "Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." Verse 14, "Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say," and this is the other quote, "If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." Now, I drew your attention there to the two quotes. Which one of these verses sounds more like Fairfield County to you? Verse 13 or verse 15? Verse 13, let's look at it. "Today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit." Versus verse 15, "If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." Which of those two verses sounds more like the area we live in, right? I think we would all maybe hopefully be in agreement here that verse 13 sounds a little bit more like us. We'll today or tomorrow, we'll go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Do you hear us? Hey, we set the dates. We set the timelines. Life happens on our terms. And we set the destinations. We'll go here, we'll go there, we'll do it for this amount of time, we'll be there for that amount of time. And we set the objectives. We'll do this or that, we'll trade, we'll make a profit. And this is what's gonna happen. We set the outcomes. We set the dates and destinations. We set the objectives and outcomes. We control the future. We control the future. And if we're not careful, this type of planning, James is gonna teach us, it tends toward evil. This isn't godly planning. This isn't wise planning. That's not the type of planning that leads to flourishing. I'm often surprised at how many Christians declare what they're going to do with their lives without God, but then get disappointed in God when it doesn't happen. We don't bother to ask if the Lord wills, what should we do? Instead, we tell God what we're doing, and then later get to blame him if it doesn't go according to plan. James says this can be a type of evil, a type of arrogance. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce. If you're not familiar with The Great Divorce, in The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis kind of takes this fictional journey through hell. It's kind of the gray land, he calls it. And there's a guide kind of leading this tour through hell. In the midst of this, the tour guide is kind of showing this picture of what happens in a life completely separated from God. And as you're going through, you're learning the stories of these people, and you're kind of seeing what happens when we choose to live in relationship with God or out of relationship with God. This is a quote from The Great Divorce. C.S. Lewis says, there's only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. Whose will are you living for? Do you control the future? Or does God? If the Lord wills, we will do this, that, or the other. Jesus taught us to pray this way. Jesus taught us to pray this way in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before Jesus' trials and his crucifixion. We see Jesus pray, he says, not my will be done, but yours. The Christian life is marked by seeking and surrendering to the will of God. And it's one of the hardest, if not the hardest things to do as a Christian. Not my will, but God's. If the Lord wills, we will do this, that, or the other. I remember thinking when I was 20 years old, you kind of hit this point, and I was early in college, and there was this like question, a lot of times in college you're faced with like, what are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do with your life? I thought it would just kind of happen in college, but it turns out people are always asking that question. What are you doing with your life? And I remember it kind of dawned on me that there's it's like, I don't know. I'm in college. I just want to have a good time. I just want to enjoy the moment. I just want to be present, and I just want to live how I want to live, and I want to do what I want to do, and I just want to, rock the world because I'm Charlie. There's this mindset of like, what are you going to do with your life? And we start to think of it, and the authors of the Old Testament have talked about this a lot. In fact, in Ecclesiastes, it talks about this a lot. And there's this sense in which we kind of get the mindset that we should probably just eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we're all going to die. Shakespeare made it popular in Henry IV, but it actually is biblical wisdom. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 24 to 26, chapter 3, verses 12 through 15, chapter 8, verses 15 to 17, chapter 9, verses 9 through 10. Comes up again in the prophet Isaiah, chapter 22, verse 13. You hear a little bit of it in a story that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 12, verse 19. You hear it again when the Apostle Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 32. You hear it in James chapter 1, verse 10. In James chapter 1, verse 10, it says that the sun rises with its scorching heat, this is verse 11, and it withers the grass, its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. The Old Testament word here is hebel. It's the idea of chasing after the wind. And if we're not careful, hebel will lead us to hedonism. We just go after what feels good. Pleasure after pleasure after pleasure after pleasure. We just eat, drink, and be merry because nobody can control the future and know what's going to happen. And I remember thinking that as a college student, there are these two kind of prominent pillars of hedonism. One is the pursuit of pleasure, and the other is the pursuit of power. Both pleasure and power. It feels good to be in control. It feels good to be in charge. And James says, in the midst of these, you fade away in the midst of these pursuits. You're like the author of Ecclesiastes says, you're striving after the wind. Your life is but a mist. It's a flower that fades and falls. It's grass that withers. And this is why in our day and age, actually old atheism is kind of making a comeback, So there's a lot of conversations happening in the Christian secular circles right now about, kind of new atheism is on the decline. It's almost kind of like that really aggressive atheism that saw like reason and kind of rationale as its kind of tenet as the main thing has really kind of run its course. And people are seeing kind of those new atheists are kind of starting to their arguments are falling apart a little bit. And this kind of modern rational thinking of like, it doesn't make sense to follow God. People are like, well, actually, the more we learn, the more it kind of makes sense to follow God. And so the new atheists are kind of under attack. But what's happening underneath that is that old atheism is actually making a comeback. Old atheism, the romantic atheism that was kind of born in the Enlightenment, says that, hey, eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we're all going to die. Just do what feels good and control as much as you can. The old atheists were hedonists. And if you're paying attention to what's happened in the fringes of our society, where I like to call the fringes and the cringes and the cringes are bringing back old atheism. The pursuit of pleasure and power are running rampant in our world. And they're making this comeback because people are looking and go, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? We should just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we all shall die. But the Apostle Paul said that there's an alternative to hedonism. If you want to know what the will of God is for your life, if you look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 3, the alternative to hedonism is holiness. What is the purpose of your life? Paul says this in the letter to the Thessalonians. He says that the will of God is your sanctification. The will of God is your holiness. The will of God is that you would be glorified and live with him forever. The objective to your existence is holiness. It's not just to eat, drink, and be merry. It's to be holy. And I remember because that kind of hedonistic path when I was early on in college, it led me to almost getting arrested. I was at a party and I was handcuffed and I was sitting there and I was waiting for the police to take me to the station. You're kind of processing all the things in your life and all the things stuff that's going on. And I remember sitting at that party. I remember sitting there in those handcuffs and thinking like, what am I doing? Where am I? Where is this path going to lead me? And fortunately, the officers at that university, they didn't want to deal with college people that night. So they just wrote me a bunch of tickets, a ton of tickets, very expensive tickets. And I was very grateful to not have been arrested and to instead leave with these tickets, but it meant that I had to go to court. I had to go back to this town where I had committed these crimes, and I had to stand before a judge and testify for the crimes that I had committed. And I remember driving down, it was, this is central Illinois, okay? So central Illinois, it is exactly what you think of when you think of Illinois. It is corn for miles. And then the corn is broken up by beans. And then there's more corn and more beans, and you're just driving. And so all the roads, super straight. There's no winding or anything. So I was actually being driven to court as a 20-year-old by my mother. And I remember there was this Casting Crowns song, okay? I was listening to Casting Crowns CDs. So for those of you that are old school Christian contemporary music fans, I was listening to Casting Crowns. I remember I was singing this song kind of to myself, kind of out the window, watching as the corn and beans and everything were going on this long ride. And I'm singing this song, and I'm kind of like thinking and processing my life. And my mom turns down the radio, and she's mad. And she goes, "Where are we going right now?" And I'm like, "Well, we're going to court. And she's like, why are we going to court? I'm like, well, because I got all these tickets. And she's like, what? You're over there singing this Christian song. Who are you? And I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea. But the song, the lyrics of the song are lyrics that come right out of these passages that we're talking about today, from James and from these Old Testament passages. The lyrics of the song is, it goes like this. It says that I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow. A wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. My life is incredibly short. What is the point of all of this? Is it just to be here for a few decades and then be gone? If that's all there is, then eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow will come sooner than you think. But then the song goes on to talk about how you, Lord, you hear me when I call. You catch me when I fall. Who am I? I am yours. I am yours. My story is so much bigger than the couple of decades that we get in good health. We were created for holiness. To be holy is to be a dwelling place for God, to be a sacred vessel for good. When we hear about holy things in the Bible, holy places are places where the presence of God dwells. You were made to be a dwelling place for God. God longs to live in your heart. You are as sacred to him as the temple itself. Every vessel that was used for worship, that's what you are to God. You are a sacred vessel, a dwelling place. You are made for holiness, not hedonism. You were made for holiness, to be a place where God dwells and to be a sacred vessel for good. Who are you? You are his. You belong to God. Wise people seek and surrender to the will of God, because they've been so captivated by that picture of who God sees them as that they can't imagine becoming anybody else. They can't imagine becoming anybody else. Wise people seek and surrender to God's will. We did young adult ministry for a number of years, college ministry for a number of years, high school and middle school ministry for a number of years. And students, people were always asking, well, how do I know? How do I know the will of God? And this is like, it was some crazy thing, because they'd always come to me with the most specific thing. How do I know if I'm supposed to be gluten-free? I don't know, that's not very. How do I know if I'm supposed to marry this person? How do I know if I'm supposed to take this job? How do I know if I'm supposed to live in this place? How do I know if I'm doing the will of God at lunch today? And I'm like, you know what? Here's kind of what I've learned with discerning the will of God. If you really want to live into God's will, if you really want to pursue holiness, start with the general things, the big things. Love God with everything. That is God's will. Love him with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Love everybody all the time. If you will seek to live a life of love, you will generally be in the will of God. Start with the basics. Love God and love people. Serve one another. These are the basics of the Christian life. Put others' needs before your own. If you're asking a question about the will of God, ask this: is this an act of love and service? Is this an act of humility and worship? If you start with the general things, you can start to get more and more specific with the will of God. Most of your questions will be answered with those things. Can I do this in the name of Jesus? If you can, then you're in the will of God. Did you notice what James says? If the Lord wills, we will do this or that. We will do this or that. God's will for your life is holiness. And if you will turn your heart toward him, you will stay close with him. This is how I think a lot of our young people were approaching holiness. They thought like, oh, my heart is in this direction toward what feels good and what helps me, what I can control, the power and pleasure of this world. And God's over here, and God's will kind of sounds good, and God's will kind of looks good, but kind of tough. You're trying to moonwalk their way into heaven. And God's like, why don't you start here and turn your heart toward me, seek and surrender to my will, and the things of this world will grow strangely dim as you pursue holiness. When your heart is directed toward the will of God, the specifics work themselves out because you are walking closely with God. If you will seek and surrender to God's will, you will live a good and beautiful life. To combat this old atheism, we may need to go to some of our old philosophers. Soren Kierkegaard, 19th century Danish theologian and philosopher, said it this way, that purity of heart is to will one thing. One thing. How beautiful is it that God says, hey, if you will direct your heart toward me, all the details will be worked out. If you'll walk closely with me, you'll live an amazing life here on earth. Why don't you plan for heaven and live on earth? Instead of planning for earth and hoping you get into heaven. Make plans for holiness, eternal plans for holiness, and then live it out day to day. I think that's what David was getting at in Psalm chapter 24. If you want something to pray this week, and I'd like to give you some sort of practice as much as I can. And we've been reading through the book of James, and maybe you're feeling like that practice is kind of wearing down a little bit, and you're looking for something to kind of add on to it. If you're looking for a prayer practice this week, maybe you just want to pray some of Psalm 24. In Psalm 27. Psalm 27. I think David really captures what Kierkegaard was talking about. Purity of life is to will one thing. In chapter 27, verse 4, you hear David say, one thing I have asked of the Lord that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. The only thing I want in life is to be close with God. The only thing I want in life is to be close with God. Verses 8 and 9, God has said, seek my face, and my heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger, O you who have been my help. Cast me not off, forsake me not, O God of my salvation. God, I want to be close to you, and I want to stay close with you, and the only thing I want in this world is to be close with you. Verse 11, teach me your ways, O Lord, and lead me on a level path. Show me how to live here on earth. Give me the specifics of your will for my life. This is what I've noticed when we seek the will of God. We often are seeking it for the future, but not seeking it in the present. The will for God is actually, God's will in our life is actually most clear in the past when we look back. If you will seek God in the present, if you will stay close with God in the present, then your story as the past unfolds, your story will be full of stories that you can look at and go, that was God's will. It was God's will. It was God's will. Teach me your ways and lead me on a level path. Verses 13 and 14. I believe that I will look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I believe that I will see God move here and now. His kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Verse 14, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Plan for heaven and live on earth. We can pray these prayers. We can turn our heart toward God because of what Jesus has done. And there's a practice that we share in each and every week where we gather around the table. We remember the night that Jesus was betrayed. We remember his life offered as a sacrifice for us. But today I just want you to focus in on that part where Jesus prayed in that garden, not my will, but yours be done. The will of God was that you and I would have a way of being close with God forever. That we would become dwelling places for the Holy Spirit and sacred vessels by which God's grace and goodness flow into this world. So each and every week when we get together around the table, it's a celebration, it's a meal, it's a remembrance. It's also a covenant. There's a promise that God has made to us to never leave us nor forsake us. And we respond to that promise in recognizing his faithfulness. We say, we want to walk faithfully and closely with you. And so each and every week, it's almost like our hearts are turned again toward Christ when we gather around the table and we remember Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Around here, if you're new, we practice an open table. Everybody is welcome to participate in the table. When we come together, we take hold of the elements, we hold on to them for just a second, and then we participate in communion together. We pray the Lord's Prayer because that's the prayer that the church has prayed since Jesus walked on this planet. And then we receive a blessing each and every week as we're at the table together. So today, all of you are welcome. All are invited to participate in communion as much as you desire.